All right, so if you would first, Dr. York, just say your name for me and then spell it for me so we get it right.
Okay.
With those guys. Go ahead.
My name is Bill York, Y-O-R-K. Same as New York or the Grand Old Duke of.
Okay, good, good. And if you would just say I'm a wildlife biologist, have been for...
Yeah, well, I'm a retired wildlife biologist, have been for about 40 years. Most of my experience, of course, in Africa, and a relatively small amount here in the United States.
What or mostly were you involved in Africa exactly?
Well, at various times in my life, I was an inspector of the Kenya police chasing terrorists in the forest. Then I was national park warden and a game warden and a professional hunter. I was a professional hunter mainly for the purpose of making money to pay for my university education. I didn't have a rich father and mother to pay for it.
Oh, would that be nice? So tell me when you came over the States and why?
I came to America first of all in 1969 to start a company called Lion Country Safari in Florida, and I developed for them. I was the director of wildlife. I designed and developed 6 parks for them. And I captured animals in Africa and brought them over to America, and I trained the wildlife staff and that sort of thing.
Great. Let me make sure this car doesn't get too close. I think we'll be all right, Jeff. Tell me when you first became aware of the... Let's let him get by. It was sounding quiet enough. It's the car. Okay. Tell me when you first became... Sorry.
You have to wait until he parks over there.
Yeah, I guess we are.
We got a bee buzzing around him too.
Did he go away? He's right there. Oh, go away.
He'll get fed up and he'll go away after a while. I should have brought some breakfast for him, maybe. But bees are part of wildlife. They're part of nature.
This
so
is true.
Yeah,
You're probably used to them, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay, everybody okay? Sure. Tell me when you first...
Bees making noise though.
Yeah, it's right near my ear there. Go away, guys. We don't need you. It's actually not a bee. It's a wasp, a little yellow jacket.
A yellow jacket, okay. He's gone.
But they're very good. They don't bother.
Okay. Tell me when you first became aware of the Bigfoot, I'm calling it a phenomenon, I know that.
Well, I've always been interested in cryptozoology, and many years ago, more years than I care to remember, I met a Belgian professor, Bernard Havelman, who'd written a book called On the Track of Unknown Animals. And one of the chapters in the book was about Sasquatch in North America. That was probably about 1952 or something like that I read the book. And I was vaguely interested in it. I was more interested in other creatures in Africa, or other cryptozoology animals in Africa. But I had this minor interest in Bigfoot. Then when I came to America, when I first moved to Oregon, in fact, I was director of wildlife for Wildlife Safari near Roseburg. And I was approached by a man who lived in Roseburg and said that he'd heard of Bigfoot the night before on Mount Nebo, and would I go with him to check it out? So I went and checked. I didn't find anything at all on Mount Nebo, but it sparked my interest. I went up there 2 or 3 times. And I concluded, quite wrongly, that the Bigfoot probably didn't exist because I couldn't see how there was a sufficient food supply throughout the winter for him. But then when I moved to Grants Pass and started hiking around in the coastal range, I realized that there are quite a lot of bears there, and where bears can live, Bigfoot can live, because I suspect they have the same dietary requirements. I suspect that Bigfoot is very omnivorous, mainly vegetable matter, but you know, small creatures, small animals, grubs and birds' eggs and things. And I began to realize that it was very possible for them to survive. And then I met Matt. A few days after he saw Bigfoot here at the caves, And he and I had lunch, and he told me about it, told me how he'd found it and how it had found him, really. And so I then started going out on expeditions with him, and of course we amassed such a lot of physical information. And although I have not seen a Bigfoot myself, I've heard them. I've heard Bigfoot several times. And some of our group have, since we've been doing this research, seen Bigfoot. So you can say until I've actually seen one myself, maybe I'm not 100% convinced. But I'm pretty close to 99%.
Interesting. That's terrific. Tell me your thoughts on why you feel that maybe it's not as accepted as it should be by the general public.
Well, first of all, it's obviously a very cryptic animal. It hides away. It's very shy. Hides away a good deal. But we have to bear in mind that there have been about 10,000 sightings recorded, in the last 50 years or so. And it cannot all be fantasy. I mean, some of it could possibly be, but it cannot all be fantasy. I think one of the reasons why it is not so generally accepted is because nobody has ever brought back either a living or a dead specimen. But that should not be necessary. It is apparently necessary in the minds of many, but it should not be necessary. After all, one can gather up an awful lot of physical evidence, as we have, without necessarily bringing in a body. Surely the evidence of witnesses who are valid witnesses and certainly not crackpots, that should be, in a court of law, that would be allowed, Physically, that's considered to be physical evidence. Somebody's actually seen something happen. And also with the other evidence that we've gathered, I think any objective person who had been out with us on some of our expeditions would become, like myself, convinced of its existence.
Terrific. That's great. Let's talk a little bit about the credibility factor and Matt's story in particular. What was it about his story, his situation that piqued you enough to get involved personally?
Well, apart from anything else, I'm interested in paleoanthropology. And in my studies of paleoanthropology, I've studied Gigantopithecus, which is a creature that is known from its fossil remains, mainly from China, but also they found segments in places like Thailand and Burma and so on. So there was a very large creature known from the fossil record, which from what the fossils would indicate was very much like the descriptions we now have of both the Yeti in Central Asia and Sasquatch in North America. And it was not at all inconceivable to me, since we know that the animal did exist in Asia. It was not inconceivable to me that it could have crossed into North America before the straits, the Bering Straits broke through, before the seas broke through, while there was still a landmass, and established itself here. It would have become somewhat different to the Asiatic Bigfoot. One of the reasons why possibly we haven't found fossils and so on of it here in the Northwest is because creatures don't fossilize in rainforests. You see, they rot. The flesh, of course, rots away. All the soft tissue rots away very quickly. But the bones also rot away before they can fossilize. So that's why, for example, let us say in the Amazonian jungles or in the Central African rainforest, you never find fossils. Too much rainfall, the humidity, and everything rots away before it can fossilize. Then I had another fortunate happening. Shortly after Kenya became independent, we were visited by a group of Russians that came out. And the professor in charge of the group, I took him on a safari into the Serengeti because they were very excited, the first opportunities of seeing this massive African wildlife. And he had for many years, on behalf of the USSR government, conducted research into Sasquatch or Yeti, or whatever you care to call them, in Central Asia. And for about 15 years. And he said he had 200 or 300 researchers working all over Central Asia, and he said over 100 of his people had seen Bigfoot individuals, Bigfoot families, camping areas, and so on and so forth. And so although he personally had never seen one, he was convinced of their existence in Central Asia. So it all seemed to me very logical that there should be Bigfoot in North America. I'd rather suspect that with the destruction of forests as is going on and the increasing number of people living in the area, there will be an increasing number of sightings.
Certainly is.
You need that.
Yeah, that last part about destruction of forest.
Yeah, that's a great line. Okay. You imagine with the destruction.
Yeah, well, with the destruction of forest, and I know it's called utilization of renewable resources. To me, it is destruction of old growth forest. That means that the forested areas get smaller and smaller. It means that civilization gets closer and closer to the heart of the forest. So I would expect more humans to be seeing more Bigfoot. Although the Bigfoot population is probably diminishing and the human population is increasing, there will be more contact. And I suspect that is a lot more contact than we know about, because I believe that a lot of people who see Bigfoot will not say so. They will not report it because they are afraid of being considered to be kooks. You know, oh, they're a crackpot, imagined it, and all that kind of thing. So I rather suspect that there is a lot more evidence available than we know of. The people just simply will not report.
But the evidence is there.
The evidence is there.
Can you say that for me again? I stepped on you. Just say the evidence is there.
Well, the evidence is there. There is no question that the evidence is there. One finds so many tracks. We've picked up, I guess, over 40 very well-defined footprints made casts of them in our research area. And it's a very limited area, too. We're not trying to swan all over the Northwest. We're not ambulance chasers. We're concentrating on an area where we know there are Bigfoot, at least 2 families, probably 3, that adjoin our area of research. And we're just simply finding, pretty much every time we come up here, some evidence in the way of tracks or other evidence, bedding areas, feeding areas, broken branches, signs, territorial signs that we have found, you know. So I'm convinced, I haven't seen one myself, but I'm convinced I'm going to see one day. I shall see one.
Great. Tell me briefly, can you go over we were having a conversation last night about the DNA evidence, about the hair samples that have been collected and how they ended up testing out. Can you just do a pretty simple explanation of that for us?
Well, of course I haven't done any of the actual testing myself, but it seems pretty obvious. A primate hair is very definitely different from that of other animals. Other mammals have round strands, and primates have flattened strands. So anyone doing the study of hair is going to immediately recognize it is of a primate origin. Well, when you start doing DNA research, we know very well what human hair is like. And there aren't any other real primates in this country, except, you know, I suppose you could say that the pikers and so on are neo-primates. So any hair that is flattened and has a DNA that is different from humans has to be a primate. And since you don't know what it is, it's always called an unknown primate. But it is quite obvious that I mean, all evidence doesn't have to be positive. Negative evidence is valid as well, you know. And look at the animals that have been found in the last few years that never known of their existence. To me, the most striking is the fact that 2 different antelope species were found in the rainforests in Vietnam. Now, when you consider that Vietnam has had forest people living there for several thousand years, and yet only in the past 5 years have they found these 2 totally new species of antelope, that's pretty significant.
Can you go over a couple of the other more recent finds that people would be surprised to hear about?
I don't know how too recent they are, but for example, the king cheetah in Africa was not discovered until in the 1960s. not even believed to exist. And then when it was discovered, somebody found it in what is now Zimbabwe, it was decried by a lot of biologists. Oh no, it's just a local variation, just a local variation. But there was enough structural difference to show that it is totally different. So that's a new species, and that's a big species. That's not something that sneaks around in the grass after dark, you know. And so even quite prominent animals can remain undiscovered for quite a long time, depending on the human population. We have to remember that the okapi, which is now a very well accepted and standard creature.
One second. Sorry.
I'm at